Hey everybody, hoping I get the timing right in this. I'm hoping by the time you watch this, we've already taken a look at the Russian Revolution, so you'll have an idea what's going on with this. We've already spent some time talking about what communism is, how it differs from capitalism, and now we're moving into the roughest part of the Soviet Union's experiment, Joseph Stalin's Soviet Union. You see the dates there. I actually want to stop and just have you take a look at this painting. um, what would be the assumptions that you would make about the person is? This is Joseph Stalin you see here in the middle, right? So if you were to know nothing more about Joseph Stalin, what would your feelings be about him? Stop the film for a second and ask yourself that. Okay, we can talk about this in class, but I think a lot of people would say he looks like a strong, hardworking man. He's there for the people. The children, the beautiful children, love him so much. They're offering him flowers. Look at the beautiful uh, seaside beside, behind him. This is a style of painting that was called socialist realism. And by the way, the words communist and socialist were often used interchangeably. By the time we get to the 20th century, socialist really means somebody that believes in a democratic election system. It believes in individual liberties, freedom of speech, etc., and maybe more limited government ownership or control over the economy. Whereas a communist really just believes, look, everything is controlled by the government for the good of the people. And that probably involves very severe limitations on any type of democratic process, freedom of speech, etc. So this was called socialist, or you could call it communist realism. And the idea was this: art was of absolutely no use to anybody. Writing, theater, painting, sculpture, etc., had no value at all, except how it helped the revolution. So if you were to decide in the Soviet Union to make a film about your internal struggles and, the film has an uncertain ending, you would certainly not be given the resources to make that film, and you could actually end up in a lot of trouble. Why? Films need to promote the socialist, the communist revolution. That's what film is for. And this painting, this is probably, I don't know the painter, but probably not his idea of the most inspiring, beautiful work he could provide. It's really just kind of, okay, ridiculously pure children looking up. It's kind of a cartoon character, Stalin. But what does it tell you? He's strong, he's pure, he's our leader. The children love him. He is the future. That's the purpose of art in a communist system. So Joseph Stalin, Lenin dies in 1924. Stalin, some say he really took over in 26, 28. I'm not certain exactly why this date. Again, understand that in an American system, if the president were to die, the vice president takes over. It's in the Constitution. It's very clear. In a communist system, you have the head of the Communist Party who really rules the country. And if somebody dies unexpectedly, there's almost always a power struggle. Who's going to take over next? And in the case of Lenin's death, it took a couple of years before Stalin fought off the people that would want to have power themselves, and he was able to finally assume and consolidate control. And you see the hammer and sickle. This is the symbol of the Soviet Union. The hammer for industrial work, the sickle for cutting down crops, etc. So it's a worker's paradise. And of course, the color red you see behind it. Oh, I'm so disappointed. My little face, I can't move it here. You see, wow, this is such a shame because it's pretty funny, kids. You have Joseph Stalin and Fidel Castro. You would see Lenin. You would be seeing Karl Marx. You would be seeing Mao Zedong of China. And you will notice they're holding up beer cups and going, "Woo, woo." Yes, it is the Communist Party. Okay, I didn't make it up. This is an old-fashioned, the pyramid of the capitalist system. And what they would take is an old drawing of how our society works. And yes, you've got the working class at the bottom, and these are the true and honest workers. And above them, you've got the middle class. You've got the bankers and the lawyers and the teachers and the engineers who they are calling oppressive scum, people there to exploit the poor. On top of them, you've got the military. You've got at the very, very top, you've got the capitalists, the super, super, super wealthy. And notice who's holding all of this up? It is the poor working people. That is the belief in a communist system, at least on the surface. The 90% that do all the work that makes society go are mistreated, they are exploited, and they cause they basically are supporting the few very, very rich elites at the top. And of course, the goal in a communist revolution is to withdraw their support, topple these people at the top, and the true and honest worker at the bottom is the one that will run society. That's the idea behind it. We have seen some of these dates already. Just want to point out what you know already. The March Revolution, Nicholas II, the Tsar abdicates. That's worth looking at. Remember, there is a second Soviet Russian Revolution in November, and that is called the Bolshevik or Communist Revolution. That happens in 1918. There had been, excuse me, 1917, November of 1917. There had been a representative assembly. You might recall when we looked at the Russian Revolution that the Bolsheviks, the communists, actually lost an early vote. And Lenin just simply abolished the assembly. He said, you know what? The people made a wrong decision. They've been misled. They don't understand that we're better for them. We are not going to destroy this revolution simply because people are ignorant and voted wrong. Uh, Recall that the Soviet Union, Russia, had a separate treaty with Germany in which they gave up a lot of their territory to the Germans to stop fighting. A couple of reasons for this. Number one, Lenin was, to his credit, always against this war, which he just saw this as a capitalist war with rich people throwing poor people's lives away. Secondly, all that land that was being given away to the Germans at this point, communists believe that communism is the way of the future. It's going to happen. It's not a possibility. It is the future. So even if we, the communist Russia, are giving up this territory now, soon enough, the revolution will spread. And probably most importantly, if you'll recall, what is it that killed that provisional government? They take over in March of 1917 when Russians were sick of this war and they've been misled and people are dying and people are going hungry. And the provisional government decided we're going to continue the war for a little while. And they continue to suffer losses. Well, Lenin can't make that mistake. He understands that Russian people almost to a one hate this war, so he pulls out almost immediately. Remember, there is a 4 year civil war between we call the Red Army and the White Army. Red, of course, stands for communism. Whites are the Tsar's people and others that broke away, including, some people that believed in kind of a Western democracy. It's a 4 year civil war. It kills, I think, far more people than die in World War I in Russia and absolutely bankrupts the economy. Lenin himself, he'd been sick since 1923, suffered a series of strokes. He dies in early 1924. And as mentioned earlier, there's no clear who takes over now. It's a power struggle. By 1926, and certainly by 1928, Joseph Stalin was recognized as the leader of the Soviet Union. And again, why is it not called simply Russia, which you see here in the middle? It's the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, or the USSR, or you can just call it the Soviet Union. Some of these areas you wouldn't recognize, but some you would. Ukraine, Soviet Socialist Republic. Now, of course, that's very much in the news today because Ukraine broke away from the Soviet Union. Russians have always claimed this was, well, it's really a part of us. That's a lot of what's happening right now. Belarus is an independent country today. You might recognize some of these stands: Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan. Georgia is another independent country that was a part of the Soviet Union by this point, and in many cases did not want to be a part of the Soviet Union. particularly when we get into what we call the stands. These are Muslim majority areas that, for the most part, the people want nothing to do with what was essentially an atheistic Russian-based society. Strictly speaking, technically, Russia was a partner, an equal partner of the others. In reality, the power structure was Russia. Russia got the best of the best. And the others really, I don't know, you could argue are really just colonies as much as anything. But Stalin was not like, and this is true of all communist regimes, but Stalin in particular, we're not allowing freedom of speech. We're not allowing you to question your government. And this is a very chilling statement, but it explains his reason behind this. Ideas are more powerful than guns. We would not let our enemies have guns, so why should we let them have ideas? So not just cracking down on any oppositional speech, but like with that socialist realism painting you saw and the other propaganda, changing people's ideas to conform with the state. If possible, do it through propaganda, through messaging, through rewards. If necessary, you break people that would disagree in any way. Stalin, by the way, and you're going to hear me say this often, again, a horrifying human being, but he understood some stuff. I mean, I'll give him that. And one of the things he said is, look, one death is a tragedy. A million deaths, it's only a statistic. And if you think about this, if I told you that 500 people died in a shooting last week, you'd say, oh my God, 500 people. What if I said, actually, it was 512? You'd say, yeah, right, whatever, 500. Like the numbers don't matter. We can't wrap our brains around 300,000 versus 500,000. How many people died in World War II? Gosh, it might have been 50 million. Some say 60 million. Something like that. That's 10 million people. So we can't wrap our brains around numbers like this. One death is a tragedy. A million deaths, it's just a number. That's it. He understood some things about how the human mind works. So Stalin, remember, in communism, government plans the economy. Now, in principle, this is not supposed to be a few people are the government and who cares about everyone else. No, we're taking Marx's ideas, the communist ideas, and creating a perfect or as close to perfect as possible society. If we leave this to the free market, the people with the money decide what they do with it. They'll be selfish. They will only be concerned about their own interest. They will make short-sighted decisions based on how much money they make next week. Well, we're not going to do this. We are going to use the wisdom of the government to scientifically plan what we need. And Stalin implemented a series of 5-year plans. And the idea was this, and he spoke like this. He said, what we're going to do right now, we are far behind Western Europe and the United States. We are decades and decades behind. You know what? After 2, 3, 4 maximum of these 5-year plans, we're going to catch up to the West and we're probably going to surpass them. So the idea is this: a completely centralized planned economy. The goal is 100%. Nobody has their own money. Nobody makes their own decisions. Everything is planned by the government. And the main goal is industrializing. Russia, as you know, was decades and decades behind the West. Well, how do we start building massive, massive factories, pumping out the steel, the railroads, the automobiles, all the things of this modern world? Well, we start industrializing massively. But you can't really move a bunch of Russian people into the cities because how will they eat? Ah, here's what we do: we collectivize the agriculture. You might have 100 farmers in this area that have a little tiny plot of land. That's going to be inefficient. What we're going to do, take the individual property from those 100, combine it into one great big farm area, and because you have such a large area with so much yield from those 100 farms, the government can supply a tractor, some modern technology. The goal is we will start producing through the ability to use technology 3, 4, 5, 6, 10 times as much food, which we can send to the cities for the new working class that's working in industry. And in some ways, this really works, Guy. By the way, socialist realism. Notice who the working person is. Is he a funny looking weakling like me? No. He's young, he's strong, he's handsome. Is he being forced to work? Oh, he's proud, waving the banner of Lenin and Stalin with this factory behind him. And I don't know what the writing down there says in Russian, but you better believe it's a feel good story. Hey, this works in a lot of ways. We recall how Japanese had that crash course in modernization in the 1860s, 70s, 80s, 90s. The Soviets beat that. I mean, seriously, they go. I mean, think about this. Russia was already poor and backwards. Russia went through World War One, where it lost like 2 million men and millions more wounded. And then they have two disruptive revolutions, followed by a 4 year civil war. Russia is just absolutely, it's a broken society. It's impoverished. It's desperate. By the 1930s and 40s, it was a major industrial military power. It did work. Russia did industrialize. Russia did catch up. And I'll tell you, all the propaganda you read in the Soviet Union, reports about increased farm yield, about the new production in these factories, and all of this stuff, not all of which was true. Remember, there's no freedom of speech. So if there's a journalist that says, I think the government is lying, he needs to shut his mouth or there will be consequences. But even getting beyond that, even taking that there were some real accomplishments, human rights abuses were vicious, and we'll get into this. Um, you can argue about who the most horrific mass murderer was the 20th century, and Hitler comes to mind, and he was a horrific human being. You could make arguments that both Joseph Stalin and Mao Zedong were in that level. Again, different historians will disagree about numbers, circumstances, etc. But it was pretty awful. Massive human rights abuses, and particularly, and tell me, who has Russia been at war with for the last 2 years? With the Ukraine. We've already mentioned the Soviet Union took over Ukraine 100 years ago. So there's already some conflict. Watch what happens at this point. One of the ways of making sure that food got into the cities was to take the best agricultural land in the Soviet Union, which was in the Ukraine. It was called the breadbasket of the Soviet Union, and force these people to work, 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 and send everything they had to the big cities of the big factories of Moscow. This leads to an absolutely horrific famine in the Ukraine that probably killed 5 million people starving to death. And if you think that Ukrainians today do not remember that, Ukrainians remember that. Of course, the people that went through the horror that survived are not here, but that got passed on by generations. So the Ukraine-Russia war is not something that started 2 years ago. It has old roots. Again, all of this looks pretty incredible, doesn't it? These massive, Russia again was so backwards. It was peasant serfs and a few factories, and it was living in the 1700s while England and Germany and the United States were modernizing. This is very impressive to Russian people. Massive machinery making huge amounts of steel. All of this is coal that you see over on the right. Now, that's not inherently a beautiful thing, but what's that coal being used for? To fire these factories to make life better for people in the Soviet Union. Classic socialist realism photographs. You think this is just a natural photo? The guy happened to be standing proudly looking toward the future? No, it was staged. Of course it was. Factory in the background, proud, strong, independent worker. That's the image they wanted to portray. Again, socialist realism. This beautiful modern factory. My God, even the smoke is white. It doesn't even pollute, right? I mean, this is modern. It is gorgeous. It is beautiful. Here, CCCP is actually the Cyrillic alphabet, the Russian alphabet for USSR. That's what that means. And who is it that is steering the ship? Why, it's Papa Joe, Joe Stalin, of course. Here we see Stalin, this warm, loving human being, this father to us all, holding this beautiful blonde child in the air. And the child has love in his eyes for his founder, holding the communist flag. with flowers. Oh, what a feel good. Now, this is what it looked like on the surface. This is what Soviet citizens were being told was happening. And again, the economy did improve. But, oh, sorry, one more. Agriculturally, we'll watch I have a couple little video clips to show you in class as well. Again, you might say fields of wheat. Who cares? No, it matters. This was new to Russia. Most of Russia's agricultural production were people with shovels, hoes, sticks, hand cutting stuff. Now you've got these gas powered vehicles. I know it doesn't look like much by today. It's new, it's modern, technological, and they're making up three, four, five, six times as much stuff. And really important, by the way, a natural photograph in the middle of the woman behind the wheel, or is it staged? Well, it's staged, it's propaganda, but it sends a message. In our revolution, women are equal as well. Um, Reality? Probably not. Most of the leadership was male. Almost all of it was male. Women that lived through this period said, oh, yes, we are expected to work as equals alongside the men in the factories. And then we get home and we're expected to do the cooking and cleaning as well. So, for a lot of women, it really possibly led to even a worse style of life. So, it's not as simple as the Russians believed in gender equality. On paper, they did. But, you know, okay, so this is what you're seeing day to day in reality. This is what you're seeing around the world. This is why many Westerners, people on the political left said, hey, the Stalin guy, this is a way. Remember, 1930s, Great Depression, patterns or patches. They are seeing these images, many people in the West, where people are out of work and they're desperate and saying, this communist system, it's working. I've seen the photographs, I've seen the numbers. I'm interested. What wasn't being seen, because it was being suppressed, were other images, like Ukrainian children being starved to death by the hundreds of thousands. I mean, these are hard photographs to look at, but you look at the poor boy over to the far right, you can see his ribs, you see the distended belly. Um, Ukrainians in particular, by the millions, were starved to death. To create more food to be sent to the Soviet capital in Russia to make this great revolution happen. Yeah, again, numbers 3 million, 5 million, 4 million. I don't think there'll ever be a number, but this is what human starvation looks like. And I'll always make the point, starvation is probably the most violent death you can imagine. I mean, if I really knew that I had two choices to be shot in the head or to starve to death, I would buy you the gun. This is your body eating itself, screaming. It's apparently just unbelievably painful. You're just in constant agony as you slowly wither away. And you can see this in the faces of the living and the dead here. And this is a real part of Stalin's legacy. And this is where you start saying, this man is responsible for the death of millions, tens of millions of people. And he was quite well aware what was going on. This wasn't accidental. So again, the Russian economy during the Depression. Look, remember 1929, the global depression hits and it's bad. US Steel is producing something like 3% of what it did in 1929. It has laid off its entire workforce. It's not working. What's happening in the Soviet Union those same years? Iron and steel production, it doesn't drop, it triples. Again, you're an out of work steelworker in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, United States, and you haven't had work in 2 years, and you read that this different way of organizing the economy has led to a tripling in production, no unemployment at all, your ears are open. You might hear some stories. Well, I hear there were some people starving. I don't know. I haven't seen pictures. They're hard to get out because the Soviet Union did a very good job of propaganda. But it is appealing to a lot of people. And what we mean by rhetoric, it's talk. The Soviet Union say in the Soviet Union, all people are equal, Russians and non-Russians, people of any ethnic group, men, women, we are all one and the same. We are equal brothers. And that sounds great. It was absolutely not true. There's no question that Stalin and the Soviet leadership saw the Ukrainians as disposable because they're not Russians. But in principle, the Russian is no better than the Ukrainian. Yeah, well, again, that sounds nice. The Soviet Constitution guaranteed people freedom of speech to express their ideas and the right to elect their officials, and that's great. And they did have elections. Do you want to vote for the member of the Communist Party, or do you want to vote for the member of the Communist Party? Those were your options. So, no, it was no legitimate democracy. There was no legitimate people's voice. Again, the communists would say, if they're being honest, yes, we limit individual freedoms. You've got it. We're trying to create a revolution that will be better for all of humanity, and it's going to spread. There is pain. Remember, one death is a tragedy, a million is just statistics. If you could regrettably lead to 1 million deaths over the next 5 years, but hundreds of millions would live better in the future. Do you do that? It's kind of the gamble they made. So, actual equality, not really. The famine we've looked at in the Ukraine and repression and purges. Now, you might have heard the term purge. If you eat something poisonous and the doctor says, my God, you've got to get it out, you purge it, you vomit it back out. Stalin began to purge the Soviet Union, to vomit out of the Soviet Union anybody who was an opponent of his or that he thought could be an opponent of his. In 1936, and this shocked so many people, in 1936, one of the great heroes of the revolution, remember the Bolshevik Revolution was 1917, so these people were around, was filmed and they distributed around the country saying, I have committed an unforgivable crime. I have betrayed the revolution. I have tried to destroy our father Joseph Stalin, who has bravely led the people. I lost my way. I was wrong. I was greedy. I ask only to be executed because there is no possible way of forgiving what I have done. And people are shocked to hear some of the most famous people in Russia speak this way. Now, why are they speaking like this? Because right outside of the film camera, there's a gun. These people have been told if you don't say this to the camera, your family will be massacred. Um, this is the trial of the 16, and the 16 people that were still famous from their work 20 years ago that Stalin said, I believe they could be a threat to me, put them on trial. And if you're being put on trial in the Soviet Union, you've already been found guilty. And these 16 confessed to working against the revolution and were executed. This is in the middle of what they call the Great Terror. This is Stalin's attempt to eliminate anybody who could ever be seen as an enemy of his. This is pure authoritarianism. It is about me. If you are not loyal to me, you are an enemy of the state and you will be rooted out. And we see this type of thing happening increasingly in the world today. To this extent, not yet. It's estimated that about 3.7 million Russians, or people in the Soviet Union, were accused of anti revolutionary behavior, anti Stalin behavior. And again, if you're accused, you're guilty. End of story. Um, 3.7 million tried, and there may be a few cases where someone's found not guilty, but almost certainly never. Of those 3.7 million, about 20% of them are just flat out executed, gun to the head, however it's done. Also, the term gulag. Siberia, of course, is that north eastern part of Russia. Bitter cold, temperatures 20, 30, 40 degrees below zero. They would set up these little rehabilitation camps, and they're often just death camps. You would go out there, you would freeze to death, you would starve to death. In fact, in today's Russia, Alexander Nabokov, I can't recall his name, but he was an opponent of Vladimir Putin, and he was sent to one of these modern versions of these camps where he died at about the age of 40, about 2 months ago. I'll see if I can find something in class to look at. So we don't know. Did 1.5 million, 2 million die? Honestly, it's a huge number. It's just a statistic. And any other Russian or Soviet citizen who thinks I'm not sure about what Mr. Stalin is doing. I'm not sure about the Ukraine, about the famine. These show trials, I don't believe that these were real. Are you going to say anything? Because you're next. And remember, it didn't matter if you were an opponent of Joseph Stalin. What mattered is he thought you were. And at that point, it is your death sentence. Final slide, and this is long before good old Photoshop and AI that we have today. Um, this is a photograph. This is Vladimir Lenin, right? The father of modern Soviet communism and still a hero in Stalin's time, standing next to Leon Trotsky. And Leon Trotsky, many thought would be the new leader of the Soviet Union when Lenin expired. He and Stalin became bitter enemies. Eventually, Trotsky lost the battle, had to leave Russia, and about 20 years later was murdered in Mexico by one of Stalin's agents. It was actually an ice pick, of all things, to the back of the head that killed Leon Trotsky. Now, here is the same photograph. What do you notice is missing? Any memory of Lenin, our people's glorious leader, associating with the awful, awful, awful enemy of communism, Leon Trotsky? It never happened. And this was very common. People would simply disappear from photographs. They called it airbrushing. They were removed. Trotsky was never an ally of Lenin's. He didn't know Lenin. Lenin would have never talked to Trotsky. Oh, but I remember. What do you remember? You remember the gulags? I remember nothing. Lenin never spoke to Trotsky. By the way, this got to a ridiculous point. Stalin was only about 5 feet 4 inches tall. And he always, you'll see in every photograph, he's looming above everybody, this giant bear of a man. They would either put Stalin on a box when he was photographed with others, or in other cases, they would dig holes in the ground so that everybody stood in the holes. Stalin stayed on the ground, and he was the tallest. I mean, this is real stuff. Obviously, much easier today with deep fakes, which you can do with a $300 laptop, but that was done. Anyway, we'll look at more of this in class. You've got your notes. Remember, don't want to capture every word on these, but you've got an idea about the main things. And remember to come up with at least 3 questions for the class, things that you want to know more about, things that you weren't quite clear about. Needs to be in by 8:15 in the morning on the day that it's due. I'll compile those questions, and we will look at the age of Stalin in class together. Have a really nice night. Bye.